Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar. Before we start, let me give a self-intro, a very brief one. My name is Traipo Chua. I'm based in Singapore. Just to make sure that you can hear me, everybody can hear me. Chi, can you just give me a positive response? Okay, very good. Um, I come from a maritime commerce background. I joined the maritime industry quite far ago in 1984. So I have over 30 years of experience in the maritime operations, shipping operations, and shipping broking. About 10 years ago, I started up Ships Focus. And in 2021, at the invitation of the Singapore government, which found that there was not enough VCs coming into the maritime technologies segment. So we set up a fund specialized in investing in maritime startups. So today I focus on how innovation and capital flow can help transform this industry. So it's really a great pleasure of me to moderate this session. Um, Before we start today's webinar, I also want to give due thanks and appreciation to our organizer, Earth Venture Capital. It is a global climate tech VC dedicated to backing earth-changing deep tech startups that are key to decarbonizing emerging Asia. Born from a shared belief that science and economics are our best solutions to fix the planet, their bold vision is to foster a new era of investment that prioritizes protecting and preserving our home. As a VC, Earth provides holistic support from market bridging to Asia to key hirings and strategic fundraising guidance, ensuring innovations get the backing that they need to thrive. And with hands-on approach and a mission to decarbonize through groundbreaking techs, Earth is at the forefront of solving the climate crisis and driving sustainable progress in the APAC region. So a big thank you to Earth and also Chi for all the hard work at the background organizing this webinar. Um, so let me start with today's webinar's title, Scaling Dual-Use Maritime Techs, Accelerating Capital, Capability, and Fleet Integration. We are meeting at a very important moment for maritime innovation. The line between commercial maritime tech and defense maritime capability is really blurring fast. Autonomy, subsea robotics, sensing, digital ops, renewable energy support. These systems used to live in separate worlds, but now they are converging, overlapping, and reinforcing one another. That creates opportunity, but it also creates pressure because building dual-use tech is not enough. You have to prove it, you have to fund it, validate it, certify it, and crucially, get fleets to adopt and integrate it. So today we are going to explore what it actually takes to move from the lab to capability to fleet deployment. So I'm really looking forward to moderating this session, but just a few quick notes before we begin. One, when you have any questions, please type in anytime throughout the session, not just at the end. We want your reactions and curiosity as they arise. Two, Chi from Earth will be collecting and compiling the questions, And closer to the end, she will put them up on the slides for our Q&A segment. So even if your question is posted early, it will be captured. And today's webinar will be run with about 60 minutes with the live panel discussion, including 10 to 20 minutes of Q&A based on 3 discussion themes or blocks: capital, capability, and fleet integration. And with that, shall we begin by hearing briefly some self-intro of our panelists first. But instead of me introducing the panelists, I will invite each of them to briefly introduce themselves, the companies that they represent, their work that they do, and the angle they bring to the dual-use conversations. We'll go in this order: Grace, Justin, Su Ting, Ken, and then last but not least, Jonathan. Grace, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Grace. I'm the co-founder and CEO of BX. So BX brings the startup angle in this webinar. We design, build, and operate hovering autonomous underwater vehicles to carry out large-scale inspections of infrastructure. We leverage on autonomy to look at how this kind of underwater work can be done at scale a lot more efficiently. And the webinar topic of dual use is very relevant to us because in underwater, the space is actually shared by both commercial and defense customers, both of ours. And in this case, capability, capital are both very important aspects to growing the company. Handing over to Justin.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Justin Haynes. I'm the Business Development Manager for Forces Limited. We're based in the UK, but we have office now in Ashburn, Virginia, and also in Sydney, Australia. So a global defence company. Forces was born 3 years ago from 5 companies that were operating in the oil and gas offshore industries. And the idea was to form one single point of contact through which to funnel combined technologies. So we integrate technologies to customer requirements and also provide a single touch point for others in the industry to discuss potential integrations and the like. So a defense-facing global integrator, which brings an awful lot of technology from just one conversation. So that's Forces. Why did I join Forces? My background was 28 years in the Royal Navy, first off as a warfare officer and then subsequently as a mine warfare and clearance diving officer. Enjoyed some great jobs on exchange in France, frontline bomb disposal in the UK, and also command of mine hunters and a NATO squadron in the Mediterranean and Black Sea. So a reasonable smattering of operations underwater, which hopefully prepared me well for this job, talking about the underwater environment and applications for defence that leverage the wealth of experience and knowledge in the offshore sector.
Fantastic. Su Ting,
Okay,
are you there?
Yes. Yeah, I'm here. So hi everyone, this is Su Ting. I'm part of the investment team at Shift for Good. So firstly, I apologize a bit for my voice as I'm down with a bit of flu. But yeah, so we are an impact venture fund focused on technologies that decarbonize the mobility industry, which includes land, sea, and air transportation. We are based in both Singapore and Paris, and we invest in both Asia and Europe. At Shift for Good, we are backing founders who can build innovative solutions which make the oceans cleaner and more efficient, as well as strengthen resilience and security at sea. And that often includes dual-use companies, which is why I'm excited for a topic that we'll be discussing later.
Great. Ken?
Good morning, I'm Ken. I'm the robotic operations lead from offshore renewable energy catapult in the UK. Um, uh, the catapult is initially set up by the UK government in focus areas and sectors, um, trying to leverage the knowledge and expertise to provide technology pathway for innovations and working with OEMs and research and trying to become the conduit for technology development. I'm very excited about today's webinars to understand how the Catapult can play a role within the development on dual use technologies. Um, Obviously, we support a lot of different technology for offshore wind, from turbine main components all the way to robotics, subsea and above sea technologies. And I do very much aware of a lot of these technologies are um, very, very capable of using in both sectors. So looking forward to some of the discussions. Thank you.
Great. Jonathan.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Jonathan from Octave Capital and IMC Ventures. Prior to this, I was doing engineering in the oil and gas. I made a transition, and today my role involves startup investments and corporate innovation. With corporate innovation, we focus on introducing startups and new technologies into our core operating business. And the idea here is to tackle some of the problem statements that our business units or the core business would face, right? So I understand I'm the last one before we start this panel, so I will keep this short. Thanks for having me on this webinar, and I'm excited to hear what other insights this panel will bring.
Thank you. Thank you all for your self-intros. Fantastic. We do have a very diversified group of professionals, don't we? I'm going to start with our theme one, capital and scaling dual use. I like to begin with capital because you can have best dual use technology in the world, but if the capital model doesn't fit, it won't reach readiness or deployment. Dual use innovation sits in a complicated middle ground. It's not pure software, it's not pure commercial, it's not pure defense. The development cycles are long and the early customer validation can be tricky. So let's talk about who actually funds this and why. Grace, BX is a fascinating example of establishing both commercial and defense relevance in subsea autonomy. In your journey, who believed first? Was it commercial asset owners, defense users, or specific types of investors? Who helped people understand the value?
Yeah, so I would say that in BX case, we are very fortunate that we built this technology 14 years ago when we were in the university. So in that 14 years, we actually had the opportunity to engage with different players in the ecosystem, be it capital players, defense end users, and commercial customers. And why we decided to start BX was because we already felt that 5 years from the time that we will start the company, we need these three people to come in together. Maybe they can have like 1 to 2 months of gap between each other due to their sales cycle. But we always talk to people who have the conviction that technology can change our world for the future. So even when we are talking to defense and customers, we are not talking to the end users that are operational units. We are talking to the innovation units that are funding the future 10 to 15 years from now. When we are talking to investors, we are not talking to late stage investors that are looking for like revenue and profit. We are looking at investors that believe in just an idea, believe in the team. So Ship's Focus, Octave Capital are definitely both of you are in our cap table right now. Seeds Capital as a government fund is also an active believer. And our commercial customers, they are also we didn't talk to the big companies at the beginning because as a small company, you need to stay focused on delivering the very simple stuff to people who really need your solutions urgently. And that's where we found that in smaller companies, their problem was not as large scale. They don't have like 6,000 people looking through our proposals. So it was much easier for us to close the sale and then build that confidence across every of these players in the ecosystem and continue building that confidence as we grow.
Wow, that's quite interesting perspectives there. Justin, Fossils works with programs that require deep tech maturity and long-term reliability. From your perspective, what combination of funding, customer program, co-investment, industrial partnerships actually helps a dual-use system grow past the prototype stage?
Wow, what a question. I think that the challenge is always to demonstrate capability, but defense has shifted the paradigm recently. They have shifted from making very specific requirements about exactly what they've decided they want. And I was guilty of that. I worked in the headquarters where I was writing requirements that had to be absolutely right. I'll come back on that because that's part of the governance process that causes a problem for us. But we basically end up in a situation where we've got proven capability. We show a roadmap towards what the future could be like, be that proof that we can scale it, proof that we can protect a sovereign supply chain, proof that we can actually deliver what we say, and that the system will work. And much of that comes from our experience in the commercial sector.
I see.
But at the same time, we are fighting against a commercial requirement in a government department in defence that requires that the customer exactly define what they want, so that they get no more or no less than what they want for that contract, because that's to the penny what the money allocated delivers. And the challenge now is moving in the capital space, is bringing capital into a more flexible space where it can be applied where a project takes itself, rather than actually aiming for a singular known point. And in defence, with very slow programs, that can mean that actually the danger is that you develop something and deliver it that is out of date before it's in service, or could be better than it arrives in service. And that's the challenge that I face.
That's a very valuable perspective, Justin. Shooting, many people assume impact investors only look at green technologies, not dual use. That there's a strong climate safety resilience dimension here. How does Shift for Good think about dual use solutions in the context of sustainability and offshore renewable enablement?
Yeah, so in the past, people tend to link defense together with red flag, but right now we believe the narrative is shifting in Europe, especially. So many institutions now recognize defense and resilience as part of sustainability because they protect infrastructure and supply chains. So for us at Shift for Good, dual use potential actually acts as a quality filter. So when a company gets picked up by a defense program, it's usually a strong signal, because military buyers, they won't touch unstable or unproven tech, and they definitely don't want to work with teams that cannot deliver. So if a startup managed to pass the bar, it tells us a lot about how it stacks up technically and competitively.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So this shift is for good.
Yes, correct.
Jonathan, you sit in the corporate venture seat where capital is attached to a rail fleet and rail operations. How do you assess whether a dual use technology fits into IMC's strategic and operational roadmap? Is dual use a benefit or a complication, or both?
I think there's two parts to this question, right? First of all, maybe I'll touch on how we look at dual use technologies first. And for us, it gives us comfort. I mean, it adds a layer of resilience to the startup. I've worked in companies where, our machine our machine needed servicing, but the supply actually went under because the industry turned, and we have to come up with a new machine, new policy, new price tag, and everything, right? So I think what I'm trying to say here is corporates generally have some level of conservative mindset.
Mm.
Having a dual use case for our supplier or vendor or the startup, right, gives us this level of comfort that, when the industry turn, uh, the startup will still be around because they can pivot and they can navigate the kind of downturn. Of course, the caveat here is the startup has to be able to navigate the different industries, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first part. And the other part of the question was more about how a startup sits in our strategic roadmap, so to say, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that question focuses more on how corporates view innovation. Every corporate will be very different. Every CVC will look at this very different also. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a balance between handling the P&L and also the P&L and the core business, and also something new, a new technology, a new innovation. Right? That balance needs to be struck, but that balance point is very different across all the different companies.
Okay, very good. I want to connect all these points back to the core question. You have all described capital that is becoming more aligned with capability, and all of it depends on proof. And that brings us to the next block or the next theme: capability, test beds, and validation. Ken raised a very important point in preparation. Dual use scaling depends not only on building the technology, but on building ecosystem around the technology. Ken, you highlighted 4 pillars: innovation programs, virtual onshore, offshore test sites, performance validation frameworks, and positioning within national strategy. Let's start with the first. How do innovation programs actually accelerate dual use readiness in practice?
Yes, so I guess the first point is obviously the catapult is set up for offshore renewable energy, looking at accelerating technology across that board, and part of that, you absolutely dual use technologies are very, very important. How so and again, coming back into the discussions already in different perspectives that we talked about in terms of startup company, new innovation, new technologies, ultimately how does the technology adoptions work? That whether that you're providing providing consistencies, and actually develop and scale up, and all of the big questions. In terms of innovation program, the program that we run is basically a incremental steps change for technology progressions. And that can be stipulated in funded projects that we do with industries, with government initiatives, with research organizations and university. And all of these sort of incremental steps that we have from a virtual development point of view, on all the way to commercial deployment. Our role here is to benchmarking these within this program, benchmarking what the desire of the objectives are, what are some of the proof points that they have to deliver, and evaluate their technology from a third party perspective. Because every startup will tell you that their technology is the greatest and will change the world. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of these innovations are required to disrupt markets. Because if there is no innovation, there will be no change. And the fact is that we are merging these two, commercial and defense applications, and some of the tasks are 90% or even 100% replicates. So it is very important for us to have program and the flexibility to show the industries a cross-sector view, to enable these technology to come forth.
I can see that this resonates with Grace. Grace, what helped BX break out of the early prototype cycle and move into the real world missions? Can you bring us back to your past a little?
So actually when BX signed our first contract with our first few customers, they will already give us some real world conditions to deploy the systems in, and we have to do a series of risk assessment to assess whether the autonomy, you're letting a vehicle run free by itself, whether this behavior can be trusted. But to manage the risk, we will also do deployments in various test sites around the world. So not just in our home country here in Singapore, but we had been doing test beds in Rostock, Germany, UK with the catapult with Ken, and also in Belgium to actually validate that autonomy needs to be something that is reliable in multiple locations, not just in like one country or one particular location. So having all these test zones is super important to help that. BX is already in discussion with various government agencies here in Singapore to also establish Singapore or maybe Asia's first autonomous underwater test bedding zone, where we can invite people from all around the world to validate the robustness of what we really say as autonomous behavior, not just automatic path planning. So you can actually see these vehicles make decisions on their own, respond to real world challenges when you have different currents and waves. So I think like test bedding locations are super important, and it needs to be public in a place that's easily accessible so that people can actually get there, not like need to take like a very long journey out.
Great. Let's go to your second pillar, Ken. Why do we need virtual onshore and offshore demonstration environments, and how do they complement each other?
Absolutely, it's a great question because I think traditionally is whether that you can deploy it offshore or you didn't make it. So it's a lot of development and technologies have really been left alone in the dark until they're ready to be unveiled. So really, we see the opportunity and the need for innovations to really grow from incubations format from virtual and digital twin deployments, and that lower the cost, that provide an early stage of access to what would be a real world environment. And some of this virtual digital twin environment is not just a gaming environment. These environments are modeled with physics engines that will mimic what will be the real environments, whether that is an offshore or in a test environment. And we gather these data with collaboration with the industries. So all of those virtual deployments and iterations and debugging of autonomous missions and optimization and all of these classification of automations and autonomy can really be improved out in the early stage.
Mhm.
But I think one of the main challenge when we look at onshore and offshore testing, seeing is still believing is still the motto, in my opinion, the current robotics deployments. So really, at some point, seeing the machine working, the technology showcasing its capability in different challenges, and being able to segregate different and fundamental environments. If you take away the waves, how does that work? If you introduce turbidity, how would it work? If you introduce current back in, how does the machine react? All of those uh, elements and payload and other environments, if you can introduce them piece by piece, the progression of the technologies can be clearly planned out and proven to who are looking at the technology, evaluating the technologies, and ultimately that provide that consistent approach to commercializations. So in a way that our approach that we look at is that most of our virtual simulations are based on physical assets. So you can find the turbine, for example, a turbine in the UK in the water. We're able to provide that turbine water column and air simulations. You can then test on our locations on shore in a safe environment. and actually subsequently go out to that offshore turbine to do that testing. So not only you've demonstrated tasks and autonomy within those innovations, but you're actually using a consistent test bench. So that variable has been removed by using the same data type, using the same assets type, and be able to progress through from virtual to offshore. And
That's
of course,
quite.
cost is a main factor. A lower cost model of this testing enable 10 or 15 times more the deployments and accessibility than actually you have to fund one offshore trip.
Very enlightening to me. This next question is for Justin. When Forces works with operators, whether it's civilian or defense, what level of testing and validation do they absolutely require before you would consider integrating a new sensing or an autonomy system? Is the bar
Yeah.
rising?
I think the bar is rising, and I think that certainly when I was sat in the chair maybe 4 or 5 years ago in Navy headquarters, I was starting to think then about how we could adopt at pace novel technology. And that doesn't have to be new from 3 people in a garage somewhere. This is just application of technology into a different sector for a different purpose. So that's innovation too, and how we could take things at pace and prove that they did what we needed them to do. It was a very laborious process for a ship to actually go through the process of making sure it was fit for operations and essentially benchmarking an individual ship's performance against how effective it was, for example, in a minefield. And so we used to do that so that we could then plan the missions effectively and maintain a bit of a reality check on what a ship was capable of. That has changed now, and I think defence has realised that. It's been a little slow to realise it, but certainly the test and evaluation side for defence is growing. There's an increasing conversation around that. And in fact, I was in preparation for this meeting. I was looking at the UK Defence Innovation web pages, and there is now it's active right now an innovation focus area, which is entitled "Unlocking the True Potential of Test and Evaluation for Defence." And I'll give you a concrete example of where this is going. Recently, a number of people hopefully here have heard that that Plymouth recently in the UK was designated the National Centre for Maritime Autonomy, and that's built around a very strong collaboration between UK Defence and the University of Plymouth. And all of these blocks start building. It's like gravity, isn't it? You know, you build this momentum, and so there is funding arriving now through the UK government's defence growth deal scheme. Some of that 250 million pot went into University of Plymouth to work on advanced technology. You've got Smart Sound Plymouth being set up, so that's an open test bed that can be used by anyone to actually prove systems, and the Navy is very interested in using that in the first steps. So that's kind of the growth in this area. Is it where it needs to be yet? No, I don't think it is, but I think there's very much a space where very soon we will need third-party evaluation of sensors, where defence will not just trust the supplier to deliver something which has never been delivered before, but to actually prove it empirically so that they can compare apples with apples and make the right choice.
I hope there's a great takeaway for many of you listening in. Ken, your third pillar was validation frameworks. Who should define credible performance benchmarks for dual-use maritime systems? Government, independent bodies, or test beds like yours?
It's a great question, and I don't think anybody know currently the great answer. But I guess we are making progress of doing something similar to really to understand the implications of what's required to do these validations. So looking at the dual use applications in particular, what if you take away the dual use application, the technology validations is simple. It's a technology doing a task. So what we are trying to do from the OIE Catapult point of view is to develop a performance-based validation program. So what does that mean is that regardless of what is the vehicle or the mission type, we are developing a benchmark validations to do a certain task, whether that is an inspections, whether that is a operation types, we're able to develop that overall requirements of performance. And then subsequently, this will help to inform, and we are in different discussions with the likes of insurance and policymakers, but also from standard bodies, because we see that all of this prep work will eventually be playing a role for supplying and writing these standards going forward. So we're trying to be agnostic about the approach because ultimately the performance requirements drive the technologies and innovations behind. Yeah.
Good. I like to target the next question to the investors, Jonathan and Su Ting. So, hearing what Ken has said, from an investment perspective, would such frameworks reduce risk perception and improve your confidence in funding deployment rather than just prototyping? What do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, okay, I can go first. I think it does to some extent give us confidence, at least from a CVC and VC perspective, right? Yeah. Uh, I mean, having regulations in place and having scale and commercial contracts in place kind of tells us where or what gives us a better idea of what to expect when we test build a solution, when we commercially adopt a solution. That
Okay,
risk,
Su Ting?
Yeah, I
Sorry.
agree. I think it will definitely give us more confidence as investors with such regulations in place.
Mhm. Okay, before we close the theme through, I like to have a last question for Ken, before we shift to fleet integration. How should a maritime hub position itself if it wants to become a serious dual use scaling center? What's the UK doing right? What gaps or opportunities do you see in Asia or in Singapore?
So I think Plymouth is a great example and we are working with the Smart Sound and Catapult is involved in these discussions. And I guess from an overall perspective as well, from the government approach, obviously we are setting up Great British Energies and other government organizations that is actually that the roadmap is to create these sectors and looking at how does a cross sector a approach can benefit the whole industry in terms of robotics, in terms of dual use. I think in terms of what other country need to approach, and I think most of the Asian countries are already doing, is actually setting up collaboration organization agreements with the likes of UK, certainly with the Catapult. We have a few development framework and MOUs that's available internationally to assist these sort of setup format. And I think Singapore recently we have just agreed on an MOU for looking at floating offshore wind, and from all those initiatives, some of these requirements for dual use application will come into play as part of the detailed makeup of some of these high level agreements. And just to add on to the Plymouth side of things, some of our colleagues are looking at other expansions from that area, from Smart Sound, from Plymouth, and certainly talking to the defense side and how to they agree some sort of format going forward. So that site is not only used for defense, but also for commercializations for other product that is for dual use. And on the other hand, all of our commercial side of testing, we are looking at how would we service with test assets for defense and dual use purposes, which we are already having some collaboration with the likes of BX in some of the areas.
Very good. Thank you. Now we come to the.
I think Grace had her hand
I
up just now.
raised a
Yeah,
hand
please,
because
please.
so I
Sorry.
wanted to say something, right? So I think about this
By
Asia
all
versus
means.
UK thing, how we can accelerate this. So
Yeah.
okay, UK does do some aspect of this. I think in Asia we tend to be like we tend to compete too much and we don't compete in the open. So we compete but nobody knows about what we are actually like competing about. And it wastes a lot of resources because a lot of validation has to be done one by one. But if you compete in the open, so for example, you have some weeks whereby you allow all technology players to compete in the open and share the evaluation criteria, share the performance outcomes. This is what I'm very used to in the UK and actually in Europe. They actually call for technology competitions and it's like 2 to 3 weeks where everybody have to prove your capability. You can't like just hide behind the marketing language or you cannot hide behind NDAs anymore. You actually have to prove it and then that actually brings up the capability of everybody together because now everybody needs to know you can't hide, right? And we all learn from the experience to actually strive towards being the best.
What can we learn from UK, Ken?
Again, the great point about the catapult is that the catapult is set up just to do that. Our aim is not to accelerate one technologies or one innovators. Our technology is to de-risk the whole marketplace and prepare supply chain integrations and create competitions and actually drive and put everybody out there. And so in terms of showcasing, I think a technology showcase is important. Like I mentioned before, seeing is believing, but actually looking at evaluations of technologies. When we speak, and certainly when I speak with industries, they all have their own team and look for new innovations, and they all subsequently speak to the same people with 4 or 5 potential customers. So the way that we try to approach it is, okay, when we talk to the industry, okay, let's host a industry day for technology development day, whereby we have one potentially, rather than have 4 or 5 technology providers to demonstrate and compete in the same day in the same arena, we host a technology week where we not so much interview the technology, but have that capability for the innovators to come and showcase and test and do technical in-depth workshops, where we will invite industry partners, we will invite academics, we will invite insurance and standards bodies to come in and operators. So all of those cross sectors, supply chain ecosystem stakeholder will be in the same room looking at it from a different angle. Is there a research program that we can help from an academic point of view? Is there any major milestone or major achievements that they need to do to get onto a supplier vendor list for these operators and owners? And what are some of the insurance and standard requirements that the standard body are looking to implement in the few years? Because standards are great, but they're all freeze in time when they set it, and by the time they rolled it out with a consultation period and implementation period, they're on to the next one. So they're forever changing. So our roles here is to give that progressive development for the technology, but actually being able to attract all of the different stakeholders into a arena to evaluate the technology and give feedback: what work, what doesn't work, how can they improve, what some of the integration requirements are. And I guess lastly, at the moment we are probably in what I like to explain it is we're in the early days of mobile phones. Every charger is different, every battery is different, every interface is different. We need to work towards a USB-C solutions in robotics. And I think really what we're trying to bring to light is, okay, what are the main barriers? And we talked about cybersecurity, data sharing, some of the level of competencies. At the moment, they are quite silo in a way. And Catapult here and myself and my team here is trying to unlock that so that more of these have become readily available to elevate the whole industry rather than one or two industry player within it.
Quite a few tips there. Thank you, Ken. We come to our next theme. This may be the toughest part of all, the fleet integration and adoption. Even when the tech works, many pilots don't become standard practice. So let's talk about why. Justin, what is the biggest bottleneck you think to moving from promising pilot to adopted system? Is it procurement, legacy integration, training, operational risk tolerance? What do you think?
Yes, is the answer. I couldn't put my finger on one thing. I think the biggest challenge is at the moment is legacy integration, and the level of risk that involves. Because the legacy systems have been developed in a very siloed manner by a very protective commercial entity, has written, and integration of a new system into an existing command system onto a warship, for example, is a big deal. Is a very big deal. And therefore the test bed, going back to that test and evaluation piece, the test bed is crucial to make sure that your product, and think of it in software terms, that your application software is stable, is safe, is secure, can be put onto the network. US Navy a few years ago, or US DoD, have been absolutely fantastic at this with OneNet. They setting clear requirements for a new software application to be placed onto the defence network. That's what we need is absolute clarity in standards. The challenge is that the standards differ depending on which legacy system you need to integrate to. So we are in the Wild West of mobile phones. I love Ken's analogy because that is exactly where we're at. So we always end up in a bit of a bespoke conversation, but it's getting better at every iteration, I would suggest. The challenge now is to turn small packets of funding available through, Defence and Security Accelerator, although it's now been subsumed by UK Defence Innovation, changing those projects into something which links into tangible funding to scale and enter service. And that valley of death that we talk about a lot is where potentially I see venture capital for some companies making a real impact, because the valley of death, you can wait 2 years for funding to arrive from defence. You've got a great idea, you've proved it in the accelerator, it's answered all the questions posed to it, and then it will take defence 2 years to find the money to actually integrate it. What does the innovator do in that space?
Grace, from a startup's perspective, what stops a customer from integrating and scaling even after a successful pilot? Budget cycles? Okay, go ahead.
I think when I think about this problem, the first sentence that comes to my head is nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. right? So this is the typical challenge. And when you're talking about maritime dual use, you're talking about a matter of national security. These are things that are important to a country's safety. So I cannot fault anybody in defense to have a very detailed procurement cycle. You need to protect your budgets because defense is always the biggest budget. But I think what has shifted, so I think it's about timing. What has shifted is war had happened. So when war happened, this shifted the whole entire paradigm. You know, you are no longer accountable just to make sure that you get the most value for the buck, but you need to procure at a much faster lead time, procure the best capabilities around the world at lowest cost. And that's where startups can actually accelerate that cycle. So I would say it's you needed, like, or at least for our type of company, we needed the right timing to actually bridge that gap. If we were any earlier, we would not have been important. If we are any later, we will have been too late. So then it's also about, we actually have a very detailed checklist to de-risk all the aspects that they will still be concerned about, like capability, your project management, your life cycle maintenance, your manufacturing capabilities, your supply chain management. You still have to deliver to the same standards, but you have to find some way to accelerate this process with much less with capital that are much lesser compared to the incumbents. So you need new skills. You need like the startup level of agility to deal with the existing requirement, but at a faster pace.
Okay, good. As an investor, Jonathan, do you evaluate dual use technologies based on technical promise or on the ability of the fleets to actually adopt and absorb them in IMC? In other words, are you betting on the tech or are you betting on the operator?
I think it's a blend, right? So actually what we do is running both investment and innovation. We can run the tech on our operating business. And one of the best ways to get a tech DD done, so to say, right, is to have it out on your own, with your own operating businesses, because you know what they look out for. You have a lot of faith and a lot of trust in them. And so if the technology doesn't work, they will tell it straight to your face. Right? And sometimes they are not, they're quite direct, right? They don't really sugarcoat their words because they're not selling anything, right? But they just come straight to you and say, this doesn't work, we're going to drop it. That's it, done. And then they turn around, they walk away, right? So, but Justin is right also for adoption even after a successful trial, there is a lot of factors in play. Yeah. Even for us, I cannot really point a finger to where is the biggest problem or bottleneck, right? But what we try to do is a blend of both. Successful pilot being conditioned upon, or rather adoption being conditioned upon a successful pilot, and we make sure there's senior management visibility so that when there's push from the top and push from the bottom, things go through quite quickly. And when things go through quicker and smoother, it also helps the future investment process.
Shooting, do regulatory or sustainability pressures accelerate adoption? For example, in offshore wind, subsea inspection or emission reduction? Or is it regulation still lagging behind?
I think regulation is actually pushing for more sustainability. There's actually exerting sustainability pressure, but regulations are a bit slower because startups move very fast, but regulations actually don't move as fast. So we actually we think investors are actually what's standing in between the regulations and the startups. We actually see what's happening before the policymakers too, and we think we are the ones that are actually helping to working with regulators to help to shape the policies and regulations to push for the sustainability.
Thank you. I'm coming back to Ken. You sit between the innovators and the operators. What is one thing innovators misunderstand about operators and one thing that operators misunderstand about the innovators?
It's a great questions, and often I find myself asking the same questions. What are each people are missing? I think I don't think anybody are missing anything, but I think they're not really talking from the same viewpoint. Operators expect solutions that solve the problem. Innovator look for what problem the operators are looking, and often they're not telling the full story, and not trying to. A lot of innovator look at, okay, this is what my niche and developments are, so this is what I'm going to solve, and then I'm going to find a use case for it. An operator have a problem where they doesn't really know what there is to solve. However, they don't just want to have one machine to do one job. So they're not really talking like for like. So our role here is to actually make that a bit of a open discussions. Okay, in real terms, what are your challenges? Okay, is it inspections? Oh, actually, it is not inspections. The challenge isn't inspection. Actually, the deployment is a tricky part. It's actually because of biofouling and other things that we actually couldn't deploy something to do the inspections. Hence, it's not your problem of inspections and their techniques and data quality and all of that works. It's the deployment methods. And to able to tackle that deployment method, they actually have to find a different solution to make sure that the service is deployable before deploying these technologies. So that one specific problem actually spin out into maybe two or three different stages, but the innovator doesn't actually have the full pictures of actually to tackle this problem. There's actually 5 steps to it. And rather than looking at one of the steps, this is actually 3 steps that we can implement and integrate within our vehicle and our solutions. But that talk isn't always there, due to I guess the priority of looking at new innovations and also some of the operation legacy. And one of the biggest challenge we find in offshore wind is not necessarily the competence of the technologies, but how adaptability to the current solutions. At the minute, they have a big cruise going out for X amount of days. Robotics, autonomous technologies are currently a cost adder to those missions, not necessarily cost savings. But until the adoption rate increases and the market acknowledge that these are competent technologies, they have many different use cases and increase the task percentage, then the real saving of smaller vessels, remote operations, autonomous missions, that all comes into play as the overall cost savings of operation excellence. But at the moment, it's all a bit of here and there. So our role, from my point of view, is actually elevating the importance of robotics. Wind farm is going to get bigger, going to get deeper, but also there's more security concerns, which means that actually the overlap for the dual use is going to be increased significantly in terms of infrastructure, maintenance and observations and security, cyber securities, and what are the measures that need to counter that. We are really moving more into the dual use space than ever with the development of offshore wind.
So scaling dual-use maritime technologies isn't just an engineering challenge. That's what I hear. It's a challenge of alignment, capital,
Absolutely.
capability, and the operating culture. So that brings us to our final segment, the Q&A segment. Chi has helped to put up compiled questions. Thank you all for submitting your questions. Shall we select 2 or 3 of these questions?
Yes, I have shown it on the screen. So if you just
okay, I'm going to I see here, for a startup founder building dual use capability today, what is the single smartest move? Build for commercial first and adapt to defense, or build for defense first and adapt to commercial? I will direct this to Grace and then Justin and then one investor. Grace?
When I talk to our commercial and defense customers, actually now they want to kind of move in the same direction. So it's not like building for one or the other first, but it's about finding the commonalities between both their needs and just tell them that, hello, like if I build it like that, it's going to be cheaper for you and more scalable.
Okay. Justin?
Yeah, that time-honored problem of best cost and time. Trying to solve that for the customer. Defense is would come at this question and say, we want COTS, we want it cheap. But then we're starting to see now an increase in demand for hardening, for additional tests, and that's a challenging area. So most of the systems are built for COTS, and that is because they have to be built for a very challenging environment. The offshore environment is shockingly bad. I'm not going to compare stevedores in the North Sea with Royal Navy operators in the North Sea, but neither are particularly gentle with their equipment from time to time. So actually, this stuff is built to be rugged already. Is it built to withstand a set number of Gs if dropped from a certain height, or those sorts of military tests? Well, no, maybe it isn't. But actually, we could run those tests and prove that actually the system is sufficient. The challenge here is that the cultural thinking that remains is that new equipment must meet the previous requirements of equipment. And if we're talking about autonomous systems, especially uncrewed or unmanned, depending on which side of the fence you sit, but uncrewed systems, then actually these systems are becoming more and more attritable, which means you can afford to lose them, which means that they don't need to be battle hardened to the nth degree. So they don't need to be as expensive. So it's resetting the paradigm about what is good enough. And actually, the thing that always wins is cost. So we must try to keep defense in check, try to keep a reality on this so that we produce something at exactly the right price point for defense. In doing so, we're just going to provide a more rugged solution for the commercial customer. But if the commercial customer sees an increase in price because of that defense requirement that's entering into a dual use component, they won't wear that. They don't want that. So there is a definite tension, and Grace is nodding along because that's the tension we navigate every day. Is explaining to people why it's that cheap. But if you want that level of testing, you've just put a zero on the end.
I like to have Su Ting.
It's not premium pricing, it's reality.
Yeah. Su Ting, can you provide your investor's perspective, a quick one?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I agree with Grace. It's both because defense, they have long sales cycle. It will take time for revenue to generate. So in the meanwhile, we will encourage startups to focus on both so they can generate some early commercial revenue while the defense side ramps up. And we think it's important to keep the balance so it helps to de-risk the business model as well.
Okay, so now we know what the investor thinks. So let me come to the second question. How realistic is it for Asia, Singapore, Japan, Southeast Asia to build the kind of structured test bed and validation ecosystem that UK has with the Catapult? Is that talent, policy, capital, or political will? Ken, and subsequently, I would like also to hear from Jonathan.
Okay. I think it's realistic. I think if there's a will, there is a solution. Ultimately, different areas of the world have different terrains that ultimately is going to be the physical presence of their assets, for offshore wind, for example. So yes, from offshore wind point of view, a structured test bed would be required at some point. In terms of what the Catapult have done, yes, the Catapult have done a lot of collaborations, and probably a bit of knowledge transfer and skills to look at what are some of the requirements that we will need to put in place for the government's policy to make those decisions of capital investments for these test beds. For the meantime, the Catapult, what we are trying to do is that we're trying to collaborate internationally. We are here to inform what the requirements are to do these validations, but in the meantime, we want to be the driver to really facilitate these validations, because ultimately we believe that if we can host more of these validation data and discussions, ultimately this will inform standards coming out forwards nationally and internationally for dual use applications.
Okay, good. Jonathan or anybody else want to take a jab at this question?
Yeah, I can go. I think I agree with Ken. I think it's realistic. I think we will see it emerging moving forward, right? Maybe not as unified, where every country will have similar or the same standards. I don't think that will happen, but I think having certain level of standards and structure across the different Asian players is something that we will see moving forward. I mean, if you look at the things that's been mentioned, right? Talent, policy, capital, political will, all of this in different parts of Asia, we can see it happening, right? Asia hosts the talent, we hold the population. Policies, government dependent. Capital, we see Asia and Southeast Asia as an emerging place also, right? So all of these factors are in play. But I think what I would like to see is a balance between the new technology players, the corporate players, the regulators, and the government. Right? A collaboration between these four parties is something that I think would accelerate this validation ecosystem in the near future.
Okay, a good suggestion there. The last question I have here, there's a question here about ESG and dual use. Is there any tension between impact capital and technologies that may also serve national security roles? Or is that thinking outdated now? This is directed at Su-Ting, I guess.
Yeah, I think as mentioned earlier, the narrative is shifting for sure right now. Right now, I think most people would consider defense and resilience as part of sustainability, because protecting your national security is, one of the most important aspects right now, considering today's climate. Yeah, I think what companies can do to manage perception when they are a dual use company is by being transparent. So by having a clear governance on how their tech is used, and by separating their branding for military and civil work, I think that might help. Yeah.
Very good. I think this is going very, very well. Also, I'm sensitive about the timing. We are keeping time very well. One final quick round. One line for each of you. In the next 3 to 5 years, scaling dual-use maritime technology will depend most on, and I would like you to complete that sentence. We will go in the same order as before. Grace, Justin, Su-Ting, Ken, Jonathan. I repeat, in the next 3 to 5 years, scaling dual-use maritime technology will depend most on. Grace, make it short and sweet.
Convergence of everybody's needs, be it capital, end users, and capability developers.
Good. Justin.
I would say that it's reliant on a clear demand signal, which actually forces Grace's solution. Yeah.
The demand will drive. So that's the most critical.
The response.
Su-Ting.
I think certification and compliance is important, because every autonomous system needs to go through classification and checks. and that process can take long and expensive. Yeah.
Good. Ken?
I was going to say the same thing. I think some sort of performance-based validations framework will really enable a benchmark across the industry so that people are not fighting a lone fight. Everybody is looking towards that standardizations and ultimately
Jonathan.
implementations of the standards.
Sorry.
I would say it depends on the collaboration between different players to grow this ecosystem so that we can accelerate these technologies all together.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all to our panelists and to everyone who have joined us. 3 things stood out strongly today. First, capital. We are seeing a shift from pure venture logic to mission-aligned capital, strategic, industrial, and impact-oriented investors who understand why dual use matters. Second is capability. Scaling is impossible without credible test beds, validation pathways, structured programs, and national strategies that shorten the distance from the prototype to the deployment. Third, fleet integration. Ultimately, nothing matters unless fleets, commercials, offshore, coastal security, and defense are confident enough to adopt and embed new capabilities in the real operations. That is where transformation happens. Thank you again to Grace, Justin, Su Ting, Ken, and Jonathan. Thank you all for your engagement. And that last but not least, thanks to Earth for organizing this very beautiful webinar. Thank you. We will close the session here. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.